Welcome to Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Trial Podcast. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
And I'm Sarah Jack.
This is part 5 of our Connecticut Witch Trials 101 series.
In this episode, we cover the years 1666 through 1691.
The period between the Hartford Witch-Hunt of 1662 to 1665 and the Fairfield Stamford Witch-Hunt of 1692.
John Winthrop Jr. was governor through 1679.
After he passed, his friend and colleague, the minister Gershom Bulkley, carried on his legacy of moderation in witch trial proceedings by providing advice to magistrates on various cases.
This was a relatively calm period with fewer accusations.
Only 8 accusations of witchcraft are known to have been made in Connecticut between 1666 and 1691.
These accusations resulted in only 2 indictments and 1 conviction.
The first accusation in this time frame was made against William Graves of Stamford in 1667.
The trouble started when William Graves' daughter Abigail married Samuel Dibble.
William Graves refused to give his daughter her marriage portion of her inheritance.
Samuel Dibble took the matter to court.
William Graves told Dibble he would always regret taking the matter to court.
Anne Smith testified that William Graves believed his daughter would die during childbirth,
and indicated that he suspected witchcraft,
though he wouldn't supply a name.
He said, quote, "If his daughter died, he would bring out one in this town that he never thought to do. And he said that she should not be buried presently, for he would have all the town lay their hands on her."
This was a reference to the belief that the body of a murder or witchcraft victim would react to the touch of the culprit.
Mary Schofield testified that William Graves said he had counseled his daughter to prepare herself to meet the Lord, and said if she was not delivered suddenly, she would die.
According to Schofield, Graves went on to say, quote, "Though there was one in the town that both I and mine was the worse for him, yet the whole town shall touch her, and then none will take offense."
Thomas Steedwell corroborated Anne Smith and Mary Schofield's testimony.
Midwife Mary Holmes testified that Abigail Graves Dibble had a normal labor except for 2 fits of trembling and striving.
Mary Schofield testified that Abigail Graves Dibble's face changed as she delivered her baby.
One part of her mouth was drawed up and the other down, with her lips turning black and her eyes staring out in a ghastly manner, and likewise her tongue hanging out in a dumb voice.
And upon this the child was drawn away up into her body in likeness to the belly of a whale.
And this continuing for the space of half an hour until the child lay quivering within her body.
And about an hour after, as she apprehended with the pangs of death, and not by the former course of labor as other women have, the child came trembling into the world.
Thomas Steedwell said he was helping Abigail Graves Dibble in her fits after she gave birth, when, quote, "presently falling of them fits into sounding fits, with her tongue flaring out of her mouth near a handful long, and about as thick as his wrist and as black as possible might be, and her eyes out of her head in a ghastly manner, and when those fits went off, her tongue went in again, and there was such a smell with her breath, that none in the room were able to abide the steam thereof."
Thomas Steedwell, Anne Smith, Elizabeth Steedwell, and Zachariah Dibble, brother of Samuel, testified that William Graves said, "My child will die, and I will be hanged for her."
Zachariah Dibble, Ann Hardy, and Sarah Bates repeated the testimony of others about the things William Graves said.
Samuel Dibble testified about how he had argued with William Graves about Abigail's portion.
Graves was upset that Dibble never helped him reap.
Dibble said he, quote, "got an attachment to try by a course of law for his wife's portion."
William Graves allegedly told him he would, quote, "repent the bringing that attachment as long as I lived."
He also threatened that Dibble shall live never the longer for it.
2 weeks before his daughter's delivery, William Graves went to her house and told her to fit herself to meet the Lord.
Samuel Dibble had a warrant issued to order William Graves to appear at Mr. Lane's house to discuss Abigail's marriage portion.
William Graves returned to the Dibble house and said, quote, "My child will die and I shall be hanged for her."
This testimony evidently did not lead to further court proceedings.
No indictment or other court documents exist.
But this is not the last we'll hear of the Dibbles. In 1667, Matthew Griswold of Saybrook filed a defamation suit on behalf of his wife, Anna.
Matthew was a stonecutter by trade, and there is a receipt for payment of a tombstone for Lady Fenwick, wife of Saybrook Governor George Fenwick. She died in childbirth.
Governor Fenwick bequeathed land east of the Connecticut River to Matthew in 1644. Governor Fenwick sold the colony of Saybrook to Connecticut when he returned to England to fight in Cromwell's forces.
Fenwick was appointed commissioner to the trial of King Charles I.
Hannah or Anna Walcott Griswold was the daughter of a powerful Windsor founder.
Her father was Henry Walcott, a wealthy, well-connected, significant figure in the American colonies.
Because he was a primary funder of the voyage of the Mary and John, he bought himself significant alliances with other powerful men, including Roger Ludlow, Edward Rossiter, and Israel Stoughton.
Henry Walcott was Windsor's first constable. He was appointed a deputy of the General Court in Hartford and served as a magistrate from 1643 until his death in 1655.
According to records, Henry was involved in 4 witch trials: Mary Johnson, Joan and John Carrington, and Lydia Gilbert. He possibly was also connected to the trials of Goody Bassett, Goody Knapp, and Alice Young.
Hannah was one of few women who held property in her own name. This indicates her familial connections, wealth, and status allowed for this exception.
Hannah's accuser was John Tilliston.
He had allegedly called Hannah a witch.
10 years prior, in 1657, Tilliston faced magistrates for scandalous and reproachful speeches cast upon the elders and others in a public church meeting.
He also later faced prosecution for abusing his wife on Sabbath day and chaining her leg to the bedpost with a plow chain to keep her within doors.
On another occasion, Tilliston was fined for giving a false oath.
Matthew Griswold won the suit, but the court worried how Tilliston would be able to afford to compensate the wealthy Griswolds.
Tilliston's first wife was charged with not believing in infant baptism and speaking contemptuously of it,
which likely indicates that Goody Tilliston and her husband were dissenting Baptists. New Englanders generally associated such faults, insubordination, irreverence, domestic discord, and religious deviance, with witchcraft. This was a case between the rich and the poor, between status and bad reputation.
Next up, we have the case of Katherine Harrison of Wethersfield. Katherine Harrison first came to Connecticut in 1651 and settled in Hartford.
She worked as a servant in the household of Captain John Collick.
While there, she developed a reputation as a fortune teller.
She was also considered a notorious liar and a Sabbath breaker.
Captain Collick reportedly fired her for her, quote, evil conversation in word and deed.
Shortly after being sacked, Katherine moved to Wethersfield by May 1653.
And married wealthy farmer John Harrison.
They had 3 daughters,
Rebecca, Mary, and Sarah.
In Wethersfield, John served at times as town crier, fence viewer, surveyor, and constable.
He died in 1666, leaving his large estate to his wife and daughters.
His will left 60 pounds to Rebecca and 40 pounds each to Mary and Sarah.
Katherine received the bulk of the estate, valued at 789 pounds.
2 years later, Katherine was accused of witchcraft.
On May 27, 1668, the unnamed wife of Jacob Johnson wrote or dictated an account of a time when Katherine Harrison helped Jacob with an illness.
Katherine treated him with, quote, diet, drink, and plasters.
The treatment evidently didn't help, so the Johnsons sent for Captain Atwood to help.
That same night, Goodwife Johnson walked in the door, saw Katherine Harrison standing in front of her husband.
While Goodwife Johnson turned around to lock the door, Harrison disappeared.
Afterwards, Jacob Johnson had a bad nosebleed.
Forever after, his nose bled when it was, quote, meddled with.
This testimony was sworn in court October 29, 1668, along with many other depositions.
On June 29, 1668, John Wells testified that 7 or 8 years earlier, when he was a boy, his mother sent him to fetch the cows.
As he crossed the street, his legs stopped, as if they were invisibly bound.
He looked toward the cattle that were in the street by Goodman Knott's shop and saw Goodwife Harrison rise from a cow that was none of her own with a pail in her hand and made haste home, and when she was over her own stile, he was loosed.
On July 29, 1668, Elizabeth Bateman Smith told the court that when she and Katherine Harrison had lived in the home of Captain Culloch, quote, Katherine was noted by the said Elizabeth and others, the rest of the family, to be a great or notorious liar, a Sabbath breaker, and one that told fortunes.
Katherine reportedly forecast that Elizabeth would marry a man named Simon, even though Elizabeth's love interest at the time was William Chapman. Captain Culloch did not approve of the marriage of Elizabeth Bateman and William Chapman.
So Elizabeth wound up marrying Simon Smith.
Thomas Waples submitted testimony on August 7, 1668.
He told the court that Katherine Harrison had said she read Mr. Lilly's book in England.
William Lilly was a famed astrologer and author of Christian Astrology and several other books.
He also claimed that before her execution, Rebecca Greensmith had said that Harrison was a witch.
On August 8, 1668, Mary Alcott testified about Katherine Harrison predicting that Elizabeth Bateman would marry a man named Simon. Richard Montague testified on August 13, 1668.
He said Katherine Harrison retrieved her roaming bees with unnatural speed.
On August 13, 1668, Joseph Dickinson testified that Katherine Harrison made her cattle run home by calling, Hockenham, Hockenham, come Hockenham.
Dickinson claimed 2 other men witnessed the cattle run with unnatural speed.
On August 13th, John Graves testified that his cattle refused to graze on Harrison land.
The rope tying his oxen to his cart mysteriously untied, and the oxen ran away with great speed.
Also on August 13th, Thomas Bracey testified that he once saw a hay cart approach John Harrison's property.
What was unusual was that Thomas saw a red calf's head atop the hay.
When the cart reached the barn, the calf's head vanished, and Katherine Harrison appeared.
Young Thomas rushed over and accused Katherine Harrison to her face of being a witch.
Katherine allegedly threatened that she would be even with Thomas.
Later, Thomas was reportedly visited by the apparitions of James Wakely and Katherine Harrison.
The two stood at his bedside discussing how to kill him.
Wakely wanted to, quote, cut out his throat.
Harrison attempted to strangle Thomas.
And, quote, pulled or pinched him so as if his flesh had been pulled from the bones.
Thomas groaned a couple times, and his father came to him and laid his hand on him, at which point Thomas was finally able to speak.
The next day, his parents saw the marks left by the spectral assault.
On October 6th, Katherine Harrison filed a list of grievances with the magistrates.
She said neighbors had been vandalizing her crops and assaulting her animals.
She had an ox, quote, spoiled at our stile before our door with blows upon the back and side so bruised that he was altogether unserviceable.
A cow spoiled. Her back broke and 2 of her ribs.
A heifer in my barnyard, my earmark of which was cut out and other earmarks set on.
I had a sow that had young pigs earmarked in the sty, after the same manner.
I had a cow at the side of my yard, her jawbone broke, and one of her hooves, and a hole bored in her side.
I had a 3-year-old heifer in the meadow stuck with a knife or some weapon and wounded to death.
I had a cow in the street wounded in the bag as she stood before my door in the street.
I had a cow went out into the woods, came home with ears loosed, and one of her hind legs cut off.
My corn in mild meadow, much damnified with horses, they being staked upon it.
I had my horse wounded in the night, as he was in my pasture, no creature, save 3 calves with him.
More, I had 1 2-year-old steer, the back of it broke, in the barnyard.
More, I had a matter of 30 poles of hops cut and spoiled.
All which things have happened since my husband's death, which was last August, was 2 year.
She named witnesses.
On October 12th, Rebecca Smith testified that Jonathan Gilbert's wife loaned Katherine Harrison a hat.
Katherine wanted to buy the hat, but Goodwife Gilbert refused to sell it to her.
After Katherine returned the hat, Goodwife Gilbert put it on and was afflicted in the head and shoulders.
When she removed the hat, she was well again.
This happened every time she tried to wear the hat.
Eventually, the Gilberts burned the hat.
William Warren testified on October 27th that Katherine Harrison was, quote, a common and professed fortune teller.
On October 29th, Joan Francis testified that in November of 1664, she was lying in bed with her husband and child when the apparition of Katherine Harrison appeared.
Joan placed the child between herself and her husband.
That night, the child became ill
and suffered for 20 days before dying.
Joan Francis further said that Harrison's daughter came to ask for her emptyings in the summer of 1668.
Joan told the girl that she had none and went to brew some beer.
The beer barrel exploded loudly, terrifying the children and sending hops and head flying down to the end of the hall.
On October 29th, Mary Kirkham told the court that she and Mrs. Wickham had seen the apparitions of Katherine Harrison and her dog appear in Mrs. Wickham's house in the night.
On October 30th, William Warren said that Katherine told his fortune and those of his master's daughter, Simon Sackett and Elizabeth Bateman, in about 1651.
She told fortunes by looking at hands. On May 11th, 1669, Katherine Harrison was indicted. The indictment reads, Katherine Harrison, thou standest here indicted by the name of Katherine Harrison of Wethersfield, as being guilty of witchcraft, for that thou, not having the fear of God before thine eyes, hast had familiarity with Satan, the grand enemy of God and mankind, and by his help hast acted things beyond and besides the ordinary course of nature, and hast thereby hurt the bodies of divers of the subjects of our sovereign Lord the King, for which by the law of God and of this corporation thou oughtest to die. What sayest thou for thyself, guilty or not guilty? May 11th, 1669.
The prisoner returned not guilty and referred herself to a trial by the jury present.
On May 25th, Samuel Martin Sr. testified that Katherine Harrison had predicted the deaths of Josiah Willard and Samuel Hale Sr.
Also on May 25th, 1669, Mary Hale testified that on the 29th of November, 1668, she was lying in bed when something heavy fell on her legs.
The heavy object turned out to be a dog-like creature with a head like Katherine Harrison's.
The creature walked around the room and disappeared,
but returned a week later.
It crawled up her legs onto her belly.
She reached up to feel it
and felt a human face.
Presently then, she had a great blow on her fingers, which pained her 2 days after.
While the beast was present, Mary was unable to call out to her parents.
They finally heard her when the thing disappeared again.
Unfortunately for Mary, this was not her last encounter with this creature.
It returned December 19th and spoke to her.
You said that I would not come again, but are you not afraid of me?
Mary said, no.
The voice replied, I will make you afraid before I have done with you.
And then presently Mary was crushed and oppressed very much. Then Mary called often to her father and mother, they lying very near.
Then the voice said, Though you do call, they shall not hear till I am gone. You said that I preserved my cart to carry me to the gallows, but I will make it a death cart to you.
Mary replied she feared her not, because God had kept her and would keep her still.
The voice said she had a commission to kill her.
Mary asked, "Who gave you the commission?"
The voice replied, "God gave me the commission."
Mary replied, "The devil is a liar from the beginning, for God will not give commission to murder. Therefore, it must be from the devil."
Then Mary was again pressed very much.
Then the voice said, "You will make known these things abroad when I am gone. But if you will promise me to keep these aforesaid matters secret, I will come no more to afflict you."
Mary replied, "I will tell it abroad."
On May 25th, 1669, the jury could not reach a verdict.
The magistrates ordered Katherine Harrison to remain in jail until the October session of the Court of Assistants.
The magistrates posed 4 questions to a group of ministers.
1. Whether a plurality of witnesses be necessary legally to evidence one and the same individual fact.
2. Whether the preternatural apparition of a person legally proved be a demonstration of familiarity with the devil.
3. Whether a vicious person's foretelling some future event or revealing of a secret be a demonstration of familiarity with the devil.
4. Whether harm inflicted by a person's specter or apparition, if legally proven, was proof of diabolism.
May 26, 1669, Samuel Hurlbut and Alexander Roney testified that Josiah Gilbert denied being Katherine Harrison's cousin and said that he only knew her as, quote, one that followed the army in England.
This may have been an implication that Harrison had been a sex worker in England.
In undated testimony, Eliezer Kernelly testified that his late wife, Mary Robbins Kernelly, had complained that her mother had been killed by witchcraft.
Mary once spoke with Katherine Harrison about the death of her father, John Robbins, and Katherine said, "When your father was killed," implying that she knew Mr. Robbins did not die a natural death.
Alice, the wife of James Wakely, also submitted undated testimony. She reported that when Mrs. Robbins was ill, her body was stiff as a board.
But when she died, her body became extraordinarily limber. On October 12, 1669, the jury found Katherine Harrison guilty, and the court ordered her to compensate the witnesses who had traveled from Wethersfield to Hartford to testify.
Marshall Gilbert acted as Harrison's attorney in requesting that those who owed money to Harrison should appear before the assistants to settle their debts. The court granted this motion.
Jailer Daniel Garrett was awarded 12 shillings for attending Katherine Harrison at the special court.
On October 20th, the group of ministers at last returned their answers to the 4 questions which had been submitted by the magistrates.
To the first question, whether a plurality of witnesses be necessary legally to evidence one and the same individual fact, we answer that if the proof of the fact do depend wholly upon testimony, there is then a necessity of a plurality of witnesses to testify to one and the same individual fact. And without such a plurality, there can be no legal evidence of it. John 8:17. The testimony of 2 men is true. That is legally true, or the truth of order. And this chapter alleges to vindicate the sufficiency of the testimony given to prove that individual truth, that he himself was the Messiah or light of the world. Verse 12, Matthew 26:59-60.
To the second question, whether the preternatural apparitions of a person legally proved be a demonstration of familiarity with the devil, we answer that it is not the pleasure of the Most High to suffer the wicked one to make an undistinguishable representation of any innocent person in a way of doing mischief before a plurality of witnesses. The reason is because this would utterly evacuate all human testimony. No man could testify that he saw this person do this or that thing, or it might be said that it was the devil in his shape.
To the third and fourth questions together, whether a vicious person's foretelling some future event or revealing of a secret be a demonstration of familiarity with the devil, we say this much, that those things, whether past, present, or to come, which are indeed secret, that is, cannot be known by human skill in arts or strength of reason arguing from the course of nature, nor are made known by divine revelation, either immediate or immediate, not by information from man, must needs be known, if at all, by information from the devil. And hence the communication of such things. In way of divination, the person pretending the certain knowledge of them seems to us to argue familiarity with the devil, inasmuch as such a person doth thereby declare his receiving of the devil's testimony, and yield up himself as the devil's instrument to communicate the same to others.
Katherine Harrison remained in jail while the magistrates considered the minister's words.
On May 30th, 1670, the court finally rejected the guilty verdict and released Katherine Harrison upon payment of fees and agreement to leave Wethersfield.
In June, Katherine moved to Westchester, New York, now Westchester Square in the Bronx.
Her oldest daughter, Rebecca, had married a man named Josiah Hunt from Westchester.
By July 7th, Josiah's father, Thomas Hunt Sr., had gathered signatures on a petition to remove Harrison from town.
Notice she moved in June, and this guy's got a petition ready on July 7th. He's, lady, you're out of here. Governor Francis Lovelace initially granted their request and ordered Harrison to move.
However, Harrison refused to leave.
Instead, she found shelter in the home of Richard Panton.
On August 20th, 1670, Governor Lovelace summoned Panton and Katherine Harrison.
Panton and Harrison traveled 14 miles to Fort James to talk with the governor.
After meeting with the pair, Governor Lovelace ordered an inventory of Harrison's estate.
He then reversed his decision and permitted Harrison to remain in Westchester in exchange for an unspecified bond for her good behavior.
In October, the governor released Harrison from her bond.
Some records indicate that Katherine Harrison moved on to Long Island.
Others believe she may have died in 1682 in the Dividend community outside Wethersfield, Connecticut, now Rocky Hill.
I just want to say on these last two theories, we don't have exact records to absolutely confirm either. These are just the theories that are out there that some historians have stated. Sarah Dibble, sister-in-law of Abigail Graves Dibble, accused her husband of abuse in 1669.
Zachary Dibble claimed the bruises and other marks on her body were the result of her witchcraft.
He also claimed, quote, she had a teat in the secret part of her body that was sometimes bigger and sometimes lesser, but was half a finger long.
No formal complaint of witchcraft was filed.
And the court did not proceed against Sarah Dibble.
Instead, they released her from her marriage to Zachary.
We want to just tell you, for those who are new, witch teats found in the secret parts of their body are often the clitoris. They're talking about her clitoris.
Not a birthmark.
As if it's a foreign object attached to her body and not an important component of said body. Edward Messenger sued Edward Bartlett in 1673 for saying that Messenger's wife was, quote, an old witch or whore.
In 1678, Goodwife Burr of Wethersfield sued for slander.
An unidentified suspect was accused of witchcraft in Hartford in 1682.
Next is Goodwife Bowden of New Haven, sued for slander in 1689 after being called a witch.
Unfortunately, not much information is available about these later accusations.
The next accusation was made in 1692.
We'll have more on that in the sixth and final episode in this series.
Now here's Mary Bingham with Minute with Mary.
Alice Young. The following wonderful and thoughtful question was put forth to several people by Sarah Jack, a co-founder of the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project and co-host of this podcast. How are you planning to remember Alice Young on May 26th the 376th anniversary of her execution. I responded, I'm in Windsor that afternoon. Now I ask myself, why do I want to go to Windsor? Now that I am somewhat educated about Alice Young, I want to go and experience the area where she lived to develop a deeper understanding of her life, to stand where she stood, to walk where she walked, to bend and touch the soil where she lived. To connect to the earth where she lived is almost like reaching out and touching her personal history. The other reason I want to go to Windsor is to connect with other co-founders who will be there. This solemn afternoon will be spent with people who, at the center of their hearts and minds, desire greatly to exonerate Alice, along with all of the others who were convicted and hanged for the capital crime of witchcraft in colonial Connecticut, a crime they did not commit. This wonderful group of people banded together late spring of 2022 to fulfill the dreams and help with the previous ongoing effort by Tony Grigo and Beth Caruso to finally bring justice for the innocent people who lived over 375 years ago. Please visit the Facebook page titled CT Witch Memorial, founded by Beth and Tony, established in 2016, to learn of the stories of the victims and to read about how Tony started the exoneration process in the late 2000s, before Beth joined him about the year 2015. The current co-founders of the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project are myself, Sarah Jack, Joshua Hutchinson, author Beth Caruso, and Tony Grigo. Our powerhouse representatives at the state level are Representative Jane Garibay and Senator Dr. Saud Anwar. We are all of like minds, like hearts, and work 150% so that all of the wrongfully convicted will see justice. To find out more about Alice Young, please listen to the episode of this podcast titled Connecticut Witch Trials 101, Part 2, Witchcraft Belief, the Founding of Connecticut and Alice Young. And also consider reading One of Windsor by Beth Caruso. You won't be disappointed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And Witch Hunts News. We had the privilege of spending the week of May 15th, 2023 with Dr. Leo Igwe, Director of Advocacy for Alleged Witches of Nigeria, for a New England speaking tour. He had the opportunity to share the striking parallels between the historic accused witches and the alleged witches being attacked around the globe today, with several audiences, including Connecticut legislators and constituents. He told us about recent circumstances of targeting vulnerable members of society with blame and punishment for natural misfortunes. He showed us their faces. He told us their stories. He has let us know how significant it is when local or state governments in the United States make a formal acknowledgement of the wrongs of witchcraft persecutions. Therefore, the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project's work for an official state exoneration of the 17th century accused and hanged witches of the Connecticut colony resonates globally. It is that important. Thou Shalt Not Suffer podcast supports the Joint Committee on Judiciary's Bill H.J. No. 34, resolution concerning certain witchcraft convictions in colonial Connecticut. We still need your additional efforts as we are waiting for the Senate to take H.J. 34 to vote shortly. Will you take time today to write a Connecticut senator asking them to recognize the relevance of acknowledging the Connecticut witch trial victims? You can do this whether you are a Connecticut resident or anywhere else in the world. You can do this as any political party member. This is a bipartisan effort. You should do it from right where you are. You can find the information you need to contact a member of the Connecticut State Senate with a letter in the show links. The House has passed the bill. We need the Senate to follow suit. Your message to them gets this done. We have a very exciting update out of Stratford, Connecticut. Due to the thoughtfulness and effort of town historian David Wright, Mayor Laura Hoyduck has signed a proclamation declaring May 15th Goody Bassett Day. Goody Bassett's first name is unknown, and she was executed in Stratford in 1651. The Town Council of Stratford will be voting on a resolution acknowledging her innocence next month. Their decision will be heavily influenced by the decision of the Senate on their vote for H.J. 34. Please send your message of support to the Senate. for Giddy Bassett and the other accused witches of Connecticut Colony who need their good names cleared, and for the victims suffering right now each week from mob witch attacks across the globe. Get involved. Visit endwitchhunts.org to support us purchase books from our bookshop, merch from our Zazzle shop, or make a financial contribution to our organization. Our links are in the show description.
And thank you for listening to Thou Shalt Not Suffer, the Witch Trial podcast.
Join us next week.
Subscribe in whatever app you use to get your podcasts.
Visit thoushalltnotsuffer.com.
Remember to tell your friends and family about Thou Shalt Not Suffer.
We want your support for our efforts to end witch hunts. Visit endwitchhunts.org to learn more.
Have a great today and a beautiful tomorrow.